Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kurt VandeMotter, and I'm honored again to be invited to participate with the Elite Meet Group. I'm sorry we can't be in person, but this too shall pass, and we will prevail. There's so many people I'd like to thank, but I won't go to the time right now. What I want to really do is tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Kurt VandeMotter. I own a search firm called Linked Executive Search, and I help companies fill hard to fill positions. So what we want to talk about today, you've had a full day, you've had a lot of meetings, you've gotten a lot of information jammed into your heads, and a lot of conversations, a lot of things to think about, I'm sure. And what I want to do is add a little bit of fun, but I'm only going to talk for about 25 minutes today because I want to save time at the end for us to have a chance to really dig into what might be some of your questions, because that's more important than any kind of conversation or data that I can give you. There are three things, though, that I want you to keep in mind as we go through our dialogue today. And that is, first and foremost, I want to make sure that as you go through this process that you listen to your heart. You all have amazing instincts. And so often we have a tendency to overlook those. And so I want you to make sure that you do listen to your heart, listen to your instincts, and let your heart tell you which direction you need to go. It will work. I want you to also start big. Okay, as this process starts, I want you to think big. There's a lot of decisions that you're going to be able to make along the way, but I want you to start big. Don't start small. Don't think small, think very big. We'll talk about that in a little bit bigger detail. And the last thing I want you to keep the blinders off. I want you to keep those out of your mind and away from your eyes, because there's a lot of opportunities that might come your way. And we want to make sure that we just don't miss those opportunities. So the whole conversation today is about creating a conversation. And creating conversations while you're going through a job search is absolutely critical. Many say, and I agree, is that your network is your net worth, which means that the people that you work with, the people you've worked for, the people in your community, the people you go to church with, your family, that network is very valuable to you. And you want to leverage that during your job search. So I encourage you to keep that in mind as you're creating conversations. But the other thing that we want to keep in mind as we're creating conversations is we want to create a brand for ourselves. Okay? Very, very important. When I was in college, professor would give me a pen maybe, and he'd say, okay, Kurt, sell me this pen. And I would say, well, it's a really nice pen. It's got a good color blue to it. It's got a nice tip. It's easy to write with. It doesn't smear. It feels good in my hand. It's got nice pads for my hands. And it's a pen that I'd probably consider giving to a friend because it's a reliable pen. Well, you are the pen now. Okay, every one of you here today are the pen. You've got to figure out a way to sell yourself. You've got to brand yourself. And your brand, as you've known it in the past, is not the brand that you're going to be able to carry forward with you. As you've been working through your career in the military, you're going to cross a bridge and go into civilian life, and that brand is going to change. But during that transition, you still have to build a brand for yourself. And where do you start by doing that? Well, some important first steps is the first thing we want to do is we've got to build a brand by identifying what our strengths are and what that brand is. Okay, so many times when I'm coaching candidates that have maybe worked for a while, they ask, where do I start by figuring out what kind of job I want? Well, first and foremost, let's back up for a second. So creating a brand is about your reliability. It's about your dependability. It's about your ability to creatively solve problems. These are many of the attributes that you might use in talking about your brand. But as you continue to develop that brand, then your brand can take a twist into operations management. Could be in manufacturing, it could be any other industries. But we want to help build the bridge by giving and looking for key words that civilians use today to help with that bridge, to help with that communication. So the key words that we want to start looking for are going to be oftentimes, for instance, in job descriptions. As you start to evaluate some of the opportunities from some of the people that you've met today and some of the opportunities that their organizations have, or maybe somebody recommends you, looking at the job descriptions and the job briefs, the roles that you might be looking at, are a great way to generate keywords and generate words that you can use in your branding story. It's an elevator pitch. It's something that you can say in 30 seconds. Somebody asks you on the first floor, what do you do? By the time you get to the 10th floor, you're able to communicate exactly what your message is. So we want to hone in on that branding. We want to hone in on that story. And we want to make sure that we've got that really solid as we start to open up our lines of communication. The real key, though, is that we want to start with a foundation. And that's what I want to focus on first here. The foundation for the work that you're about to embark on, or the work that some of you have already started to embark on, should include a couple of really important things. Let's always keep in mind branding. So first and foremost, we want to make sure that we've got a solid signature block in our email. Okay, simple as it is. Gmail address, you've got a signature block, name, email address, phone number, and a link to your LinkedIn profile. Secondly, along with branding, I want you to consider putting not an advertisement, but a reply on your voicemail. How many times do people rely on AT&T, T-Mobile's voicemail? Here's a time for you to brand yourself so you can leave a very positive message that when you're not there, somebody can leave a message and feel comfortable that you'll call them back in a short period of time. Another branding opportunity is on your LinkedIn profile. Here's an opportunity for you to, first and foremost, some basics. Make sure you're checking the box in LinkedIn that says that you're willing to work. That is a message that LinkedIn provides its users so that it tells recruiters that you're more likely to reply to messages because you want to work. You're looking for new opportunities. That's what they used to call it, open to new opportunities. Now they call it willing to work. The other thing you want to do is make sure in LinkedIn that you're answering every email that people send you. So when people send you emails through LinkedIn, I want to make sure that you reply to those messages because LinkedIn does track you and they put you in a category that you don't want to be in if you don't reply to messages. And then lastly, in LinkedIn, I would highly recommend you put in your contact information. If you've got a question, go to my LinkedIn profile and you can see where I've got at the bottom my contact information, my email address, and my phone number. Make it really easy for recruiters to get a hold of you now so that they don't have to send an email. Let them contact you directly. Again, we're all talking today about creating conversations. Your goal right now is to create as many conversations as you possibly can. We talked about starting big. We want that funnel to be really big at the beginning. The way that we do that is we cast a net really big. We start telling everybody that we're looking for a new opportunity. And we really don't exclude anything because, again, we're going to keep the blinders off. So because unless it's in a geographical area that we don't want to work in, or it's sometimes I have candidates that say, well, you know, the roles that I'm getting are 100% commission. Well, those are opportunities that you don't have to chase. But as you start to process and move companies and organizations through your funnel, we want to make sure that we keep the blinders off because so often we don't know what might be going on in that organization and what opportunities may exist that we haven't heard about. So often candidates rule themselves out or they get sideways with an organization because it's not the role that they're looking for. But I encourage you that you only have one time to turn down job offers, and that's when you have a job offer in writing. Candidates that take the opportunity to eliminate themselves early by saying they're not interested anymore could be excluding themselves from some great opportunities. So from a foundation perspective, branding, again, really important. You're going to do that in your email. You're going to do it in your voicemail. You're going to do it in LinkedIn. The other thing you can do in LinkedIn to help recruiters find you more quickly is, again, you're moving yourself from that veteran in that life in the military now across the bridge and into civilian life. So we want to use keywords that recruiters and that other people might be looking for as they start to fill jobs. So if you've decided or you're marketing yourself as more of a manufacturing person, you again might look at some job briefs to look for the keywords that manufacturing executives maybe at a director level, maybe at a manager level, maybe even go as high as a vice president or the CEO of a manufacturing organization, to look for the kinds of things and the kinds of keywords that they're using to describe the work that they do. Those are keywords that you can add to your profile as well, if in fact you do those kinds of things. So this is not a place for you to embark or to embellish, but certainly a way for you to create or develop a larger list of keywords that you can use in your LinkedIn profile that will make it easier for recruiters like myself and other recruiters that search for people like you to find you. Really, really important. So the next really important thing that most candidates don't take the time to do is really to set goals. Okay. We talked about the pen, and you are the product, you are the brand. But now we got to set goals for ourselves. So you're selling yourself. That's what your goal is. There's nobody else that can do it for you. It's the hardest job you'll ever have, is to sell yourself and to find that next job. But you've got to do that heavy lifting yourself, and nobody can do it for you. So one of the things that the best salespeople in the world do is they set very strict goals for themselves. They have these matrix because they've been doing it for a long time. You don't have those matrix yet, but let's just start with 1 week. The average sales guy will know exactly what his specifics are. So I'm going to suggest that you start off by trying to make 10 phone calls every day to introduce yourself to new people, have and create new conversations. Okay, 10 a day, 50 a week. At the end of that week, you'll be able to just adjust what you need to do next week by your numbers, because we'll want you to track your numbers. You made 50 phone calls. How many did you get to answer the phone? So how many conversations out of the 50 did you actually have? 10%? Okay, so you had 5 phone calls. Of those 5 phone calls, how many interviews did you get? How many people invited you to come in and actually have an interview for a potential job? So if you started off with 50 and you didn't get any interviews, we need to raise the number. So we need to go to 100 phone calls a week. And then we'll be able to figure out our matrix and how many calls we had and how many interviews we got. The salespeople that are the best know what their numbers are, and they know exactly how many phone calls they have to make every day, every week, in order to get appointments, how often to get deals, to close deals that generate revenue. Generating revenue for you is getting a job. Okay. So I know that that's not easy for some of you, and it may sound like it's laborious and very difficult, but I encourage you to try it for a week, because it's very, very important for you to understand what your numbers are and understand how you can affect those numbers by making more phone calls in order to generate more activity. And that's what we're trying to do as salespeople. Selling ourselves, we're trying to create more activity, create more conversations. So during the pandemic, let's just talk for a few minutes about what that is going to be like. Meaning, what are those conversations going to be like? They're going to be a little bit different than what we've had prior to the pandemic. And by that, I mean that companies are going to be asking questions differently than they have in the past. I often hear candidates tell me that during the holidays, as an example, that it's not a really good time to look for a job because companies don't make job offers during the holidays. Well, that's completely wrong. Last year, I made 3 CEO job offers during the holidays. So that happens all the time. Companies want change in the new year. So this is a great time to look for a job. The fall is a wonderful time. But don't stop during the holidays, and please don't stop because of the pandemic. Yeah, AT&T did let 30,000 people go, and they're probably going to let another 20,000 go. Coca-Cola did let 30,000 people go, and they may let more go as well. And many organizations are reducing workforce, many times not because they have to, but because they can. But at the same time, I want you to know that those same companies are rehiring. They're going back out into the market, and they're finding candidates, and they're finding people that have the skills and the traits, they have the experience that they didn't have, that these organizations did not have prior to COVID. Now, I used a couple of examples. Those may not be great examples for what you're looking for, but the same exists. Any organizations, any organization that has had to furlough or downsize their organization is likely at the same time going back and rehiring. But they're looking for people that have got data analytics skills, somebody that's got better finance skills. Maybe they've got better pricing skills than what we had before. Maybe the person they need somebody that's a better communicator, that knows how to really communicate during a crisis. These are all very real things, and these are very real things that companies are going to be looking for. And I want you to be sharp as you start to prepare yourself for these conversations, because I want you to be able to talk about what you did during the pandemic. Did you go continue your education? Most of you are still in the military, and so you've continued your work on base or wherever you're posted at. But in some cases, you've had some frequent time. And so what did you do with that time? You couldn't travel. Did you learn a new language? Did you read a few books? Maybe you just built a relationship with a few people that you hadn't had the chance to do that before. But I want you to be prepared to talk about what you did during the pandemic, because that is going to be a starting point for many executives. Many executives and organizations are making changes because they've got people in their organization that can't do the things that need to be done going forward. And you may have practiced these skills, or may be able to be an attribute to the organization because you bring these strong communication skills, these traits to their organization. I know that there's a lot that we can talk about, but talking about me and talking about what my philosophies are, or conversations that I have with CEOs and business owners, are not nearly as important as you are. And so the last thing I want to share with you as you start to do the research is I've been working with Elite Meet for a number of years now, and it is very important to create the conversations with a broad spectrum. We talked about starting full, starting big. But as you start to do that, you're going to start to identify organizations, companies that have a track record of hiring veterans, and some that don't have that track record. Many large organizations have quotas. I hate that word, but they have quotas of number of vets that they've got to hire, and for other minorities as well. But those aren't the jobs that you're looking for, guys. I'm sorry, those aren't the jobs that you're looking for. You're not a part of the quota system. But therefore, what we want to make sure that we're doing is, whether it's in consulting, or whether it's in commercial real estate, or investment banking, or private equity, or manufacturing, or whatever path you choose, make sure that you're selecting people that have successfully made that transition, and can help identify companies, and identify the companies that may not, but could use the services that you bring to the table and that you offer. More difficult when you're trying to sell yourself into an organization that hasn't brought military leaders into their organization in the past. It can be done, but it's going to be a lot more difficult. Again, the size depends on a lot of it, but in the larger organizations where you want to have the ability to be on an executive team and gain training and exposure and so forth, some of those larger organizations are going to be maybe less reluctant. Maybe they had a bad experience, or maybe they just aren't accustomed to hiring our vets. So conversations, critical to the success of what you're trying to do. Being able to talk about pandemic, being able to communicate your brand, who you are, what you do well, and the value that you bring to the organization. Stay focused on the basics. Trust your heart, and make sure you keep the blinders off. I'll see you in a few minutes with some questions and answers. Have a tremendous day, and thanks for joining me today.
You're live. Go ahead, Kurt.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining me this afternoon. I'm excited to continue the conversation You've been listening to me speak for a few minutes, but now it's time to get a little bit more engaged and start talking about some of the specific questions that you all have. So again, I'm honored and humbled to be here with you live, and let's just take the best of this next 30 minutes, whatever we've got left here, Megan, to help everybody else that's listening today. So I think that one of the first questions that came up, Megan, was that what is a recruiter's role? And I didn't spend a lot of time going over that. So let's just talk about that from the very basics and then into a more defined. So from a recruiter's perspective, there's a number of different kinds of recruiters, and it's really important that you understand this. So there's really three types of recruiters, okay? Three types of recruiters. There's an internal recruiter, and that's going to be somebody that works for the company. That's a recruiter that is actively working for the company, and they are searching for and recruiting for that organization, looking for people to join their company. And the second kind of recruiter is an external recruiter, and it's considered a contingent recruiter. So this is not an employee of the company. This is a recruiter that is being hired by the company. And the difference is there's a contingent recruiter and then there's a retained recruiter. So I'm a retained recruiter, and the difference is that I'm exclusive. When I'm working on a deal, you get a call from a recruiter and they say they're a retained recruiter. They're the only recruiter that's working on that job. The company has 100% turned that position over to the recruiter for that person to find the job. It's really important you understand the differences, because as you talk to people, you want to have confidence and ask them, maybe you could just remind me, do you work for the company? Are you an internal recruiter or are you an external recruiter? And when they say they're an external recruiter, then you'll know the difference. The difference between contingent and retained are exclusive. Contingent, there may be 4 or 5 recruiters that are working on that role. And the only person that gets paid to fill that job is the person that brings the candidate. So it can be a little bit different situation in dealing with a contingent recruiter. But the bottom line is it's really important for you to understand what kind of recruiter, so that you can just have an active conversation and understand where they sit. If you're dealing with an external recruiter, know that we are also working with internal recruiters. So generally, we work with senior level executives in the organization, but they sign us a recruiter or somebody in the recruiting team that we work with as well. But the difference is how you communicate. You always want to be honest and transparent. You want to give them the facts. You always want to have general questions ready for recruiters, no matter where they're at in the organization. But if you're dealing with an external recruiter, it's almost guaranteed that for some reason this is a hard to fill job, or they haven't been able to fill it for a while, and that's why they've engaged with an external recruiter. Internal recruiters know the job, know the position, know the company very well generally, but that's the main difference. The process, no matter where you come in, no matter what type of recruiter you get a call from, or somebody that reaches out to you on LinkedIn, the process is always pretty straightforward. And that is that first and foremost, they're going to want to have the recruiter, external or internal, is going to want to have a 15 or 20 minute conversation with you about, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me about where you've been. What are you trying to do? Where are you going? What motivates you? What are your passions? And it's just a real quick review. Oftentimes they're going to have a resume right in front of them, and they're going to use that resume to go chronologically through what you've been doing and where you've been at. Now, because you're coming out of the military, that might be a little bit different of a conversation, but in general, it's the same objective. It's just to get to know you a little bit, to learn about your communication skills. 98% of the time, these are going to be phone calls, okay? And those phone calls are sometimes the hardest phone calls, because phone interviews, you just don't get a chance to really see the person, and your enthusiasm doesn't come through like it does in a Zoom call or somewhere else. So, but the process is going to be the same. introductory call, 20 minutes, get to know you. And then as they get to know you and they feel like you're a fit and they like the things that you're talking about, then they will simultaneously start to move you through the process. And that process can be different and is different for every organization. Now, some cases, y'all, you're not going to be coming in through the organization through a recruiter, because it often happens, and many times when we talk about the networking that you're doing and building those conversations, that you may get introduced into the organization through a vice president or a director or somebody that's in the organization that's at a different level, but maybe not in recruiting or HR. Those introductions are priceless. We really like to get to those introductions and those conversations, because working with that recruiter is not always, the process can be a little bit slower, and things, not that they go awry, but it's just really great when you can have a conversation with a hiring manager and you're not having to include HR or recruiters. That can be a real bonus for you. Another one of the questions that came up, and I'll come back to that if somebody's got more questions or wants some more clarity. But I think the other discussion that was opened up was keywords. How do you develop the list of keywords? And that ties right into, how do you tell your story to somebody from military to civilian? And so I think that people that have come out of the military and made that successful transition into business, one of the things that they'll talk to you about is just the vocabulary. And so you have a vocabulary in the military that you use. Some of it's around time. We know that, we hear, your time maybe a little different than what we talk about in civilian life. It's all the same, but you record time maybe differently. But just the actions that you're doing and the missions that you've been on and the tactics that you've had to deploy and the strategic, strategy of some of the things that you've been engaged in aren't the same in corporate America. And so we are certainly, we're running strategies and we've got tactics, but we're talking about revenue. We're talking about market share. We're talking about data analytics. We're talking about consumer behavior. We're talking about customer service, customer needs. We're talking about product marketing, product development. So our vocabulary is a little bit different. A great way to continue to learn that vocabulary, and every one of you knows the words, you may not be accustomed to using it every day, but a great way to hone in on some of those key words are looking at some of the job descriptions that you're interested in. Some of the jobs that you're interested in, look at those job descriptions. Those job descriptions are going to be full of key words that the organization's looking for. Some are going to be fairly generic: leadership, management, customer satisfaction. But there'll be a lot of other key words in there, depending on the role, depending on the organization, that you can highlight that will be very useful in you communicating with the organization, but also go back to keywords within LinkedIn, using some of those keywords throughout your profile where it's appropriate as well. Now, there's no question, everybody on the call, there's no question for you to take what you've done in the military for the last 15 years, 10 years, 8 years, I don't care how long you've been there, and to try to put that into civilian language is not right. You can't do that, okay? But you can use a lot of other key words that we do use in civilian to talk about your experience in the military, so that it dumbs it down for us in civilian life, okay? And again, those words are going to be keywords that you find in job descriptions. You can Google keywords for different roles: finance, marketing, sales. And so just start a list of keywords and think about it in terms, again, of when you're carrying on conversations with executives outside of the military. How does that conversation go and what are their priorities? Let's back up for a minute, because in that conversation, when we get the opportunity to talk to some of these people, I think we talked about it earlier, is that we want to include great questions about, what keeps you up at night? What are the biggest problems you're trying to solve? Who are your biggest competitors? What and how is your team define success differently in a COVID than before COVID? So those are great questions you can write down and ask and be prepared, and you can reuse those over and over again, and you can continue to add to those. But what I want you to do is ask those questions and then stop and listen, because much of what they communicate back to you are going to be some of those key words that are going to help you better communicate with that executive, with that person, understanding what their priorities are, understanding what the biggest problems are. You'll hear a lot of vocabulary. It's going to be very, very helpful for you. So another question that Megan brought to my attention was the discovering new opportunities, the bigger picture. How do you find the right people to talk to? And that's a great question. But what I want to do is go back to the conversation, because we want to start that funnel. We want that funnel to be really big. So if it's Morgan Stanley, okay, Chase, they provided a lot of great resources for you all today. So let's just say it's in their organization. Well, you're dealing with a mammoth company. I don't even know the total number of employees, but it's above 100,000, I'm confident. And so an organization that big, it can be difficult to navigate the deep waters. First, if you've got a sponsor, you've got somebody internally that you've gotten to know or you've had some conversations with, that may be a great place for you to go to ask them just point blank, what's the difference between what they do over here and what's the difference between what they do there? What's the difference between retail banking and what's the difference between commercial banking? There's going to be differences and different groups within the organization. So in these bigger organizations, anywhere you can have somebody give you kind of a tutorial about the lay of the land and what are the organizations, that's going to be great help. Those people are going to be in two places. They're going to be people that used to work for the organization. And those people are great resources because they like talking about where they came from, and they know, and they'll talk openly and freely because they're not there any longer. But if they've not been there for more than a year, then the data they have may not be as current as you'd like it to be. Another great resource is just somebody junior in the organization. Maybe even better, it's somebody that's made a transition from the military into their organization that can, help describe it, help you understand it from their perspective. So those are some good places, but I want you to be encouraged by the fact that, especially again, in these larger organizations, do not be intimidated by saying to somebody, stop, help me out. I know that Morgan Stanley is just a giant. How do I navigate the deep waters, and where should I start? And where are some of the biggest, what part of the organization is where do you think I could be the most successful based on what you know about my background? So what I want you to do is start big, and every organization, you're going to have a funnel, and you're going to just move through that organization and that funnel. And either you're going to make a decision within, X number of conversations, meetings that, one, I'm not interested in that type of business. I'm going to move on. I'm not interested in consulting, or I'm not interested in private equity. But if you are, then you want to continue to find and have conversations with people in that single organization and other organizations like that. And there's no limits to where and who you should be targeting as far as how or who to have those conversations with. Everybody is game per se. And I don't want you to be intimidated or turned off by thinking that you're talking to somebody too high in the organization or too low. So this is the hardest part. I am not going to kid you for a minute. This is the hardest part for anybody that's going through transition, whether you're coming out of veteran in the military into civilian life, or even today when I'm coaching executives that are trying to pivot where they're at today, or they're looking for a new opportunity. This is the heavy lifting, but you guys are trained to do that. And I'm confident that you can have the conversations and you can open up the doors. People do want to talk to you, but start big, identify many people in the organization, get to know as much about the organization as you possibly can and the different groups that are successful or not even successful, different groups, because within Morgan Stanley, there's probably 40 or 50 different divisions easily. And so where you might fit, it may take you, you might have to kiss a few frogs to figure out where and what opportunity within that organization is most appealing to you. How are we doing, Megan?
We're doing great. One of the things that is often talked about is storytelling in those conversations. Can you tell us a little bit about how important storytelling is in terms of connecting with another person and how much authenticity one should share in their conversations?
Right. Great question. So storytelling really leads into a whole nother almost little mini subject I want to chat about for a second, because we do have a few minutes, is the behavioral interview. Okay. So when you're interviewing, there's two types of interviews, and most people don't know how to do a behavioral interview, but and not being you, the candidates, most people don't know how to interview using the behavioral model, HR people or managers, VPs, and so forth in organizations. Again, I'll let you do your Google on that, read as much as you want about it. But the bottom line is this, is that what they're doing in a behavioral interview is they are attempting to try to for you to talk about different situations. Okay. And this is so critical, Megan. This is if you can get this heavy lifting done, guys, on your own, on a piece of paper or, in a notebook or wherever you decide to choose to capture these stories. But this is where the rubber meets the road, in the sense that telling stories about what you've done in the military and connecting and building that bridge for the company so that you can have a fruitful conversation about what you did in the military and how it is applicable to the work that they do. Okay. And so those stories are going to come into a number of different categories. In a company, and that's where we want to start because this is the focus. In an organization, it's going to start with people. So you've managed people, you've led large regiments, you've done some amazing things in leading people. You got to be careful about how much of that story you tell us, because some of it is, you will find people that want to hear those stories. But ultimately, what I want you to be prepared to talk about is the fact that you led people because you were a leader. You're a natural leader. People followed you. Talk about the times when you were off camera, when people came to you for advice. So I want you to tell stories. Here it is. I was working in X. We were managing this team. We had to, we had some tight deadlines. And I built an amazing team. And it wasn't until afterwards that I learned about how loyal they were to the mission that we were accomplishing and how much they appreciated my communication style, because, I didn't just do X and Y. I went above board and I used other communication tools. I didn't get up from that meeting when it was over 16 minutes after it started. I stayed for another 30 minutes and answered questions. So think about the things that you can bring forward that you did in the military, but they're going to be of significant interest to somebody in the business world. Okay. You might have had a role where you got to, were managing a budget. Many of you have been in those kinds of roles, and those are very important. How do you meet budgets? How do you, stay under budget? How do you communicate when you're going to be over budget? Who are the people that worked on the team? So a story might be that, I brought all the leaders together. We knew that we had to cut $1 million out of the budget. Nobody could take ownership for 100% of it. So after 35 minutes of discussion, people agreed that they'd go back and they'd work on X and Z and come back with some solutions and ideas. We met 4 more times. And at the end, we were able to deliver a $2 million savings instead of just $1 million savings. So again, think of the things that corporate America is interested in: market share, people, information. How did you use information? What did you do? You brought information to the table. What was the result? What would you have done differently? Were you under budget or above budget? All of those things are critical, and that's a behavioral interview. So now the 5 stories that you can write, you've got 4 or 5 that you can go write tonight. And I encourage you to find one that's about people, about finance, about budgeting, about meeting numbers, about meeting deadlines. Maybe it's about implementing a new strategic idea. Maybe it was about how you collaborated with a different part of the organization. Those are the building blocks that we need to bring from the military into civilian life, and not telling them, because what they know is you know how to get things done, but you do it, through boot camp, and it's tough, and not everybody makes it. And what we want to tell is the business stories. We don't want to hear how many push-ups or sit-ups that it took, because we know you've already done millions, maybe tens of millions by now. So we don't need to hear those stories, but we want to hear the pieces of the business that you are part of. Those are going to be the stories that are going to really help you pivot into this next career.
Thanks, Kurt. And another thing you talked about is how to create conversations during this time in COVID. A lot of that is online. So are there things you'd recommend that our members can do to start conversations online, maybe in a LinkedIn platform? Any tips, tricks you might want to recommend?
Yep. So, one of the biggest tips that I have, Megan, is that it's as queer as it might sound. Whenever I send an invitation to somebody that I haven't met before, and I've been using this for 15 years, I'm a sales guy. If I think we talked about it again. You are not salespeople. Okay. You were not most likely in the line of work that you've been doing as salespeople, but you are a salesperson now. We talked about the big pen and selling yourself. But creating conversations, ask for a queer number. I know, guys, don't get mad at me. Just ask for 9 minutes, ask for 12 minutes, okay? Remember, the person that you're trying to create a conversation with probably doesn't know you. And so if you ask for 15 or 30 minutes or an hour, they don't know you, they're likely not to want to block that much time on their calendar, because they just are afraid that they've got something else that might come up that's more important, okay? So ask for a queer number. And I'm telling you, it's how I've won some of the biggest business that I've gotten sometimes, is by, whether it was in the telecommunications world or it's in my current life as a recruiter, asking a company if I can come by and visit with them for 16 minutes, okay? So use those silly numbers to ask people. It gets their attention. It's like, really? You only want 8 minutes of my time? And then it's like, okay, there's a differentiator here that I like. I'll give this person 8 minutes, and likely the conversation will go on for 30 minutes or more. But more importantly than what you ask and how you ask for it is how you prepare for that meeting. Hopefully you've done a bunch of prep before to get to know who that person is, who you're asking the meeting for. You get to know a little bit about them, who they are. Make sure you got some cliff notes, short notes. You're going to be trying to get a lot of these meetings. And so when Charlie calls, you want to be able to, as quickly as you can, identify, yeah, Charlie, you went to, you got your master's from the same place I did. Or you grew up in the same town, it looks like, that I did. Or, my father went to the same university that you did. It could be any number of different things, but we want to try to draw those straws and bring that conversation to meaning quickly. And then always have questions ready. And they can be the generic ones that we discussed earlier. What keeps you up at night? What are the biggest problems you're trying to solve? But the number one question, Megan, I think that these guys have to ask. I'm sorry, somebody's really thinking about me because my nose is itching. But I think, and I don't know any kind way to say it, guys, but is to figure out whether or not the company you're talking to has a history of or is interested in hiring vets. And that's where the rubber meets the road. And I've seen too many people get hurt too late down the process to find out that, well, they just don't hire vets at that level. So the degree that you can try to figure out that up front, where you can create those conversations with leaders to talk about how to, and asking them the question point blank, if you see that they don't have a lot of vets in their organization and it's a smaller organization, then sooner than later, you've got to ask the tough question about, how does a guy like myself make a successful transition into your company? And what does that look like? And again, then you got to shut up and let them talk and see if they will give you some nuggets or tidbits along the way that will help entice for you to continue the conversation. Because that's what we're trying to do, is we're not only trying to create the first conversation, but we're trying to create and continue conversations and dialogues with people. And that's why in 16 minutes or 12 minutes or 8 minutes, you can't boil the ocean, but you can set the seed and you can get enough interest going that they want to continue to have more conversation. The way you're going to do that is through those keywords, through just talking to them in civilian business language, asking great questions, leaning in, being positive like you are, being present like you are. And a sales tool that I'll give you all, because some people ask and some people are afraid to ask the question, is how often and when do I stop leaning in? And it's real simple. When the person that you're trying to get a meeting with or have a conversation with says, Charlie, don't call me anymore. I don't have anything for you. Thank you very much. That's when you quit. Okay. So if you've called twice, you've sent 3 emails, you sent a handwritten note as well, you've left a message for them and they still haven't called back, and you're getting ready to dial that number again and you're going, oh, this is so hard because they're not returning my calls. They don't care. Make those are the fun calls to make. Make those first, because you get to leave a message that's really cool. Hey, Charlie, I know you're crazy busy. I know you've got a lot going on in your day-to-day right now, but I'd love to talk to you for 6 minutes. If you could pick up the phone and call me back, I'd really appreciate it. Have a tremendous day, and I'll look forward to talking to you soon. Okay? Script out those voicemail messages, practice them. But that's how you create conversations with people.
That's great. And Kurt, a lot of what you've recommended here probably is making people feel very uncomfortable, thinking, oh, I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to put myself out there, and I don't want to have to do all that outreach. Can you remind them how important it is and kind of give them some tips on how to get over that uncomfortable feeling?
Yeah, no question. Man, if you don't feel uncomfortable, then, it's the same uncomfortableness for me as I'm afraid of heights. So anytime my kids want to get me, they start talking about climbing to the top of some mountain and hanging over the ledge and doing stupid things, rappelling here and there. And my hands start sweating, and your hands may be sweating, thinking about the fact that you've got to go out and create a conversation and have a conversation and a dialogue with somebody that you don't even know, and it knows more about the business world than you will know in the first 2 or 3 years, maybe. And so that's normal. It's like also getting up to make a presentation. I told my wife the other day, she was a lector at church, and I said, if you're not nervous when you go up, then there's something wrong. You should always be nervous. You guys should be nervous. That's okay. Here's a couple of tricks. Okay. First and foremost, find somebody in your network that's a great salesperson. Okay. Maybe it's an aunt, maybe an uncle, maybe it's somebody that is the husband of somebody that you've worked with in the past, or somewhere in your network. You've got to know somebody that's a great salesperson. And that's the person I want you to start to have conversations with. And I would ask them, I'd lean in on them and say, could we have calls, maybe even weekly for 3 or 4 weeks, just to talk about sales and to talk about the mindset that I need to get into? Because I've got to teach myself and train myself on how to be a salesperson right now. So that's the very first thing you can do. Second thing, call me. If anyone you want to call me, it's an open slate. Megan's got my number. Call me anytime, guys. I'm here for you. But you have to learn how to sell. You have to learn how to be that big pen. You've got to practice that. But there's not a lot of people that you can practice it on unless they are those salespeople. Okay. If you go to your aunt or your uncle or cousin that is a finance CPA or something, and you start to practice on it, they may not be able to give you a lot of great advice just because that's not what they do. And they would be intimidated by making these phone calls and doing this work just as you are. So you need to get out of your comfort zone. And the way to do that is just to start having these conversations. Guys, you can also admit up front, if you're talking to somebody that you feel like you're over your head, then it's okay to just say, this is a little uncomfortable, but help me get through this because I'm just trying. I'm just trying. And you'd be amazed, guys. We put our pants on just like everybody else does every morning, and we go to work and we drive our cars and we have families and we cook meals and we do the same things that you do and that they do. And you'd be surprised how many people will and want to have conversations with you. But being prepared for those is just as critical as getting over that nervousness and that tension that you might have about how do you make the call. But practice. If you're afraid of making these calls, practice making, just pick up the phone and practice, leave a message, record it, try recording it a couple of times. There's great Zoom and other tools you can use now to record messages and practice some of that stuff. So if you feel intimidated by it, get in front of a mirror and practice. The last thing though, real quickly, Megan, is so important is to help overcome that nervousness is I want you to work on that 30-second elevator pitch. That's got to be practiced and it's got to be, it. Because the first time you have a conversation with somebody that nervous tension comes up, it could be you step into an interview, a face-to-face interview, it could be over the phone. And somebody just says, hey, Charlie, tell me a little bit about yourself. You've got a great 30-second elevator pitch written. You've practiced it. You've got it memorized. And it's like, whew, I can do this, okay? If he had made me do 200 pull-ups, I might not have made it today, but these are push-ups and I know how to do push-ups because I've practiced this one really well. So that elevator pitch is really, really important. Get it down, practice it, do some research on it, call me and practice it, call somebody else that you know, but that 30-second elevator pitch is going to help get you past the finish line real quick as well.
Kurt, thank you. That's tremendous advice. And we so value your partnership. And you've been with us for a couple of years now and sharing your great information and tips. So thank you so much. We truly appreciate your time.
Well, I appreciate you. I appreciate the whole team at Elite Meet. I hope you will continue to lean in. Megan, real quick before we wrap up, I have been broadcasting every day for the last 5 days on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook. If you've got roles or you got people you want to talk to these guys, let me know. I have 3 or 4 guys that are willing to have conversations. So anybody that wants to have some conversations with friendly people that have already volunteered, send them my way. I've got the people lined up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kurt.
Cheers. Thanks, y'all. Peace.
Bye-bye.